The Strength That Comes from Human Weakness, a study on paradoxical human ontology. Throughout human history, great achievements have often emerged from moments of greatest vulnerability. The Renaissance flowered from the ruins of the Roman Empire. Modern economic systems were restructured from the depths of the Great Depression. And on a personal level, life's darkest moments often become sources of deepest wisdom and greatest growth. This paradox, that strength is born from weakness, directly challenges our everyday intuition and modern society's myths of success. Today, we will explore one of the most fundamental paradoxes of human existence. Why can humans become stronger when they are weak? This question invites us to examine the core characteristics of human existence and their ontological meaning, beyond simple psychological comfort. The modern society we live in worships strength, self-reliance, success, and constant growth. Social media is filled with images of perfect lives. Corporate culture considers revealing vulnerabilities as weaknesses, and mass media constantly praises stories of self-made heroes. In this cultural context, acknowledging weakness is often interpreted as a sign of failure. Yet humanity's great wisdom traditions tell a very different story. In Eastern Taoist philosophy, flexibility and softness overcome hardness and rigidity. Buddhism teaches that acknowledging suffering and impermanence is the path to liberation. And in the Judeo-Christian tradition, weakness, humility, and suffering are often portrayed as tools of divine transformation. Through this audiobook, we will explore the paradox of weakness in depth. Through the lenses of psychology, philosophy, theology, and modern science, we will examine how human weakness can become an unexpected source of strength. We will also provide practical insights on how to apply this principle in real life. Before beginning our journey, one thing must be clarified. This exploration is not meant to glorify weakness itself or beautify suffering. Rather, it is an attempt to acknowledge the full spectrum of human experience. Strength and weakness, joy and pain, success and failure, and to discover within it the possibility of meaning and growth. Now, let us begin our intellectual journey toward the paradox of weakness. Chapter 1. The cultural context and historical perspective of weakness. Perceptions of weakness across human cultures and historical contexts are surprisingly diverse. In ancient Sparta, expressions of weakness caused social exile, and in the Roman Empire, virtues, symbolizing masculine courage and strength, was considered the highest virtue. In contrast, many East Asian traditions regarded flexibility and adaptability as expressions of true strength. Modern Western society's perception of weakness has been primarily influenced by the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution. The ideals of reason, progress, and self-determination shaped an ideal type of self-reliant and emotionally controlled individual. The rise of consumer capitalism and individualism in the 20th century further reinforced these tendencies, with success, productivity, and constant self-improvement becoming cultural imperatives. However, even within these dominant narratives, alternative views of weakness have always existed. For example, the Romantic movement celebrated emotional vulnerability and reverence for nature, and various religious traditions emphasized the value of humility and self-surrender. More recently, postmodern philosophy and feminist theory have challenged traditional Western notions of strength and autonomy, refocusing attention on the importance of interdependence and relationality. Interestingly, recent neuroscience research provides evidence supporting these cultural alternative narratives. The human brain is essentially social, and our neural systems are designed for connection and empathy with others. In other words, we are biologically programmed, not as independent beings, but as interdependent ones. Here we might ask a somewhat cynical question. If acknowledging weakness and interdependence is so important, why does modern society still abhor and avoid it? Perhaps it's because weakness touches on our deepest existential anxieties, fears of losing control, of death, and of meaninglessness. Or more simply, perhaps acknowledging weakness fundamentally conflicts with modern capitalism's logic of endless consumption and achievement. For whatever reason, our society's collective avoidance of weakness comes at a serious cost. Mental health crises, social disconnection, and environmental destruction may all be symptoms of a culture that refuses to acknowledge our finitude and interdependence. In this context, re-evaluating our weakness is not merely a matter of self-improvement, but a fundamental question about the nature of human existence and the conditions under which we can flourish together. The Bible has long contained this paradoxical wisdom. The Apostle Paul declares in 2 Corinthians 12:9-10, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. For when I am weak, then I am strong." This contains the deep insight that weakness creates space for divine power to work. But to modern people, such a perspective often seems irrational or anachronistic. We can understand this reaction. Perhaps ancient wisdom seems too simple in the face of modern complex challenges. But is that really the case? Or have modern people lost an understanding of the fundamental human condition? Chapter 2: The Psychology of Weakness, the Paradox of Vulnerability and Resilience. Modern psychology increasingly recognizes that human weakness and vulnerability are paradoxically key elements of psychological health and resilience. This may seem counterintuitive, but it is consistently observed across various fields of research. In trauma research, the phenomenon of post-traumatic growth is widely documented. This means that many people who experience severe hardship, loss, or trauma develop not just recovery to their previous state, but deeper sense of meaning, stronger relationships, and awareness of new possibilities. For example, studies of cancer survivors show that many report redefining life priorities, developing deeper appreciation for the present moment, and greater authenticity in interpersonal relationships through their illness experience. In addiction recovery, hitting bottom, the moment of fully acknowledging one's powerlessness, is often considered the starting point for true healing. The first step of 12-step programs demands exactly this. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol or other addiction, and that our lives had become unmanageable. This paradox of surrender appears as a key turning point in countless recovery stories. Evolutionary psychology provides another lens for these patterns. During human evolution, our ancestors were extremely vulnerable beings. Specifically, they were physically weak, sensorially limited, and had long dependent infancy periods. Yet, these very vulnerabilities promoted adaptive strategies like cooperation, tool use, and complex language development. In other words, our weakness may have been the catalyst for our uniquely human strengths. Of course, this evolutionary perspective is just one explanatory model. It is a useful lens for understanding the world, but cannot fully capture the entire meaning or purpose of human existence. We consider evolution here not as absolute truth, but as one beneficial perspective for understanding the human condition. Psychologist Brené Brown's research has contributed greatly to contemporary understanding of the importance of vulnerability. According to her research, people who willingly acknowledge and reveal their weaknesses and imperfections tend to experience deeper connection, greater creativity, and more authentic lives. Conversely, attempts to avoid vulnerability and maintain a perfect image often lead to isolation, anxiety, and shame. Adding a somewhat cynical perspective, we might point out the irony of the modern self-improvement industry. Countless self-help books shout, "Overcome your weaknesses," while simultaneously advising be authentic. Yet these two messages fundamentally conflict. If the authentic self includes weaknesses and flaws, how can one overcome weaknesses while maintaining authenticity? Such contradictory messages leave many modern people confused at the boundary between endless self-improvement and self-acceptance. What psychological research continues to show is that true resilience comes not from denying or overcoming weakness, but from accepting and integrating it. This aligns with the ancient insight of Stoic philosopher Seneca that hardship reveals virtue. Or from a biblical perspective, it resonates with the teaching in James 1:2-4. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. These discoveries in modern psychology and ancient wisdom suggest that weakness is not merely a defect or obstacle to overcome, but an essential and potentially transformative aspect of human experience. Chapter 3: The Philosophical Dimension of Weakness. Ontological Vulnerability and the Human Condition. From a philosophical perspective, human weakness reflects not just a psychological state or temporary experience, but the fundamental condition of our existence. Existentialist philosophers call this ontological vulnerability, a concept referring to the uncertainty, finitude, and contingency inherent in our very being. Martin Heidegger conceptualized human existence as being in the world. From this perspective, humans are not fully self-sufficient or independent subjects, but always already entangled with the world and in relationship with other beings. This fundamental interdependence shatters our illusions of control and autonomy, reminding us that we are essentially vulnerable beings. Emmanuel Levinas further developed this insight, emphasizing the ethical vulnerability that arises in encounters with the face of the other. For Levinas, a true encounter with another interrupts our self-centered world and summons us to infinite responsibility. From this perspective, weakness, the ability to be open to and affected by the appeal of others, is an essential condition of ethical being. Hannah Arendt explored the essential vulnerability and uncertainty of action. According to her, the act of bringing something genuinely new into the world always carries the risk of not being able to fully control its consequences. Yet it is precisely this vulnerability that makes human freedom and plurality possible. These philosophical perspectives reconstruct weakness not as a simple deficiency, but as a characteristic unique to human existence. Furthermore, they suggest that our vulnerability is the condition of possibility for ethics, creativity, and genuine connection. Here we might make a somewhat cynical observation about how desperately modern technology and consumer culture try to deny this ontological vulnerability. Smartphones promise us constant connection and control over information. Social media provides the illusion of building perfectly curated self-images. And advertising suggests that all anxieties and uncertainties can be resolved with the appropriate product to purchase. Yet these attempts are ultimately hollow. They do not remove our ontological vulnerability, but merely conceal it, leading us into deeper alienation and anxiety in the process. Buddhist philosophy offers a powerful antidote to these modern attempts at self-reinforcement. The core Buddhist doctrine of no self, anatta, dismantles the illusion of a fixed and independent self. According to Buddhism, what we think of as the self is actually just a flow of constantly changing conditions and relationships. From this perspective, denying our vulnerability is denying reality itself and becomes the cause of suffering. Christian theology adds another dimension. In the theology of the cross, divinity itself is revealed through vulnerability and suffering. In 1 Corinthians 1:25, Paul declares, For the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than human strength. This suggests that weakness is not simply an aspect of the human condition, but, in some sense, an expression of divinity. As an empirical example, consider the story of a father with a severely disabled son. Initially, he viewed his son's condition as a problem to be fixed. However, over time, he discovered that his son's vulnerability was actually a source of deep wisdom and compassion. The son was not perfectly self-sufficient or independent, but his existence reminded everyone around him what true humanity is. His needs formed community, and his simple joys taught others to be faithful to the present moment. From these philosophical and theological perspectives, weakness is not an obstacle to overcome, but an invitation to experience our humanity and interconnectedness more deeply. Proverbs 11:2 expresses this succinctly. When pride comes, then comes disgrace, but with humility comes wisdom. Chapter 4. The theological dimension of weakness, humility, grace, and transformation. In religious traditions, especially the Judeo-Christian tradition, weakness is understood not as a simple deficiency or misfortune, but as a place of divine wisdom and transformation. In the Old Testament, God often takes the side of the weak and marginalized: slaves, widows, orphans, foreigners. The Exodus story shows how a vulnerable people in slavery became the primary beneficiaries of God's salvific action. In the Psalms, a broken heart and contrite spirit are described as the places where God is closest. Psalm 51:17 declares, "The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. O God, you will not despise." Jesus' Sermon on the Mount extends this paradoxical spirituality. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the meek, Jesus teaches. His teaching inverts cultural assumptions, suggesting that weakness and vulnerability are actually gateways to the kingdom of God. The cross itself is the ultimate expression of this paradox. At the center of Christian faith is the belief that an omnipotent God voluntarily takes on the most extreme human vulnerability: suffering, abandonment, even death. On the cross, God subverts the logic of power and domination, revealing that self-emptying and self-sacrificial love are the true essence of divinity. The Apostle Paul placed this paradox at the center of his theology. His theology of weakness is powerfully expressed in 1 Corinthians 1:27-28. But God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. God chose the lowly things of this world, and the despised things, and the things that are not, to nullify the things that are. From this perspective, weakness is not simply a state to be endured, but a channel through which divine grace and transformative power enter our lives. Paul testifies to this through his personal experience. About his thorn, he records receiving the response from the Lord: "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." To this, Paul declares, "Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me." And later, "For when I am weak, then I am strong." 2 Corinthians 12:9-10. Of course, this theological perspective doesn't provide simple mental comfort or escape from reality. Rather, it provides an existential framework in which we can experience and interpret weakness in a new way. Weakness becomes not a shameful failure, but a place of encountering God's grace, an opportunity to experience strength coming from somewhere other than our own resources. Here we might pose a somewhat cynical question. Isn't this theology of weakness simply a way of beautifying failure and suffering? It can be misused that way sometimes. But its true intention is not to glorify suffering, but to discover the possibility of meaning and transformation, even in our darkest moments. It is not an escape from reality, but a way of embracing reality more deeply. As Alejandro Garcia Rivera writes, vulnerability is our way of connecting with reality. It is our response to things we cannot control, the place where we encounter the actual conditions of our existence. In this encounter, we can discover a new kind of power. Not the power of domination and control, but the powers of acceptance, endurance, and transformation. Chapter 5. The social dimension of weakness, community, solidarity, and justice. Accepting weakness is not merely an individual psychological or spiritual matter. It has profound social and political implications. When we acknowledge mutual vulnerability and interdependence, it significantly impacts how we structure our societies and relationships. The dominant neoliberal individualism in modern society emphasizes self-sufficiency and personal responsibility. From this perspective, weakness and need are seen as signs of personal failure, and reliance on social safety nets is stigmatized as a moral defect. However, this viewpoint ignores the fundamental interdependence of human beings. We all depend on each other in various ways. When we are born, when we are sick, when we are old, and in many other moments. An ethics of weakness proposes a different kind of social vision based on the recognition of mutual vulnerability. In this vision, care and mutual support become not merely charity, but essential elements of social justice. Support for vulnerable groups is not a matter of tolerance, but an essential responsibility stemming from recognition of our common humanity. Feminist ethicists Virginia Held and Ava Kite developed this perspective into an ethics of care. According to them, humans are essentially relational beings, and dependence and care are central aspects of our lives. This perspective subverts the traditional Western emphasis on autonomy and independence, revaluing mutual dependence and care. Interestingly, sociological research shows that societies with greater equality and stronger social safety nets tend to be happier, healthier, and more resilient overall. This suggests that social structures that embrace weakness and vulnerability can actually lead to stronger communities and better quality of life. The Bible has long taught this ethics of interdependence. Old Testament law was designed to protect the most vulnerable members of society: widows, orphans, foreigners, the poor. In the New Testament, Jesus expanded this tradition by declaring in Matthew 25:40, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." Early Christian communities were structured around mutual dependence and vulnerability. Acts 4:32-35 records. All the believers were one in heart and mind. No one claimed that any of their possessions was their own, but they shared everything they had. And God's grace was so powerfully at work in them all that there were no needy persons among them. For from time to time, those who owned land or houses sold them, brought the money from the sales, and put it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to anyone who had need. Of course, this communal vision sharply contrasts with modern individualistic culture. Taking a cynical perspective, we might ask, is such an interdependent community feasible today? Or is this merely a naive utopian dream? Yet, even in modern society, there are intriguing examples showing the feasibility of this vision. For instance, Jean Vanier's L'Arche communities are places where people with and without intellectual disabilities live together, acknowledging each other's unique gifts and needs. In such communities, vulnerability is experienced not as shameful, but as an opportunity for genuine relationship and mutuality. Another example is the mutual support networks that spontaneously form after disasters. Sociologist Rebecca Solnit has documented how waves of solidarity and altruism often arise after disasters. In such moments, the recognition of common vulnerability often forms the foundation for deeper community and mutual care. These examples suggest that acknowledging weakness and vulnerability is not merely a matter of personal healing or spiritual growth, but can be the foundation for more just and compassionate social structures. 1 Thessalonians 5:14 beautifully expresses this. And we urge you, brothers and sisters, warn those who are idle and disruptive, encourage the disheartened, help the weak, be patient with everyone. Chapter 6. The Leadership of Weakness, the Power of Service and Vulnerability. Modern culture often associates leadership with complete confidence, decisiveness, and flawlessness. However, recent leadership research increasingly recognizes the importance of vulnerability and humility in effective leadership. Jim Collins, in studying leaders who make good companies great, found that the most effective leaders often display a paradoxical blend of humility and professional will. This style, which he calls Level 5 leadership, focuses on organizational success rather than personal glory, and is characterized by sharing credit for success while taking responsibility for failures. Brené Brown's research shows how vulnerability leads to more authentic and effective leadership. Leaders who can acknowledge their uncertainties, mistakes, and limitations tend to gain greater trust and loyalty, which in turn leads to more creative and innovative organizational cultures. As a practical example, consider a leader who was CEO of a mid-sized software company. When the company faced a serious financial crisis, instead of pretending perfect control and certainty, he honestly shared the severity of the situation, his anxieties and uncertainties about the path forward in an all-staff meeting. Surprisingly, this expression of vulnerability fostered team cohesion and creative problem-solving. Employees responded to the leader's authenticity by suggesting cost-saving ideas, volunteering for extra work, and even accepting temporary pay cuts. As a result, the company overcame the crisis and emerged stronger than before. This model of vulnerable leadership resonates deeply with Jesus' model of servant leadership. In Mark 10:42-45, Jesus says, "You know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." Here we can make an interesting cynical observation. Many corporations and organizations praise servant leadership while maintaining cultures that reward leaders who are focused on self-promotion and self-protection. This duplicity often erodes trust within organizations and breeds cynicism. However, leaders who truly practice vulnerable leadership can achieve remarkable results. They build cultures based on stronger trust, more authentic communication, and shared sense of purpose. By acknowledging that mistakes and failures are essential parts of learning and innovation, they encourage team members to take risks and pursue creative solutions. Jesus provides the ultimate model of such leadership. Despite being omnipotent, he took on human vulnerability, demonstrated an attitude of service rather than desire for power, and chose the cross instead of glory. His example shows that true strength is found in vulnerability, service, and self-sacrificial love. Philippians 2:5-8 expresses this paradoxical leadership model. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. Chapter 7. The Practice of Weakness. Application in Daily Life. So far, we have explored the psychological, philosophical, theological, and social aspects of weakness. But how can we apply all these insights in our daily lives? What does practicing the paradox of weakness look like concretely? First, the practice of weakness begins with self-awareness and honest self-assessment. This means acknowledging our limitations, vulnerabilities, and dependencies. Of course, this applies not only to oneself, but also to others when appropriate. However, this is not an easy task. Our culture conditions us to display images of achievement and success, and revealing weaknesses often feels risky. But as psychologist Carl Jung noted, what we do not look at becomes our shadow, and what we do not acknowledge becomes our fate. When we acknowledge and embrace our weaknesses, we stop being unconsciously dominated by them and can integrate them as part of our whole being. Second, practicing weakness means developing truly interdependent relationships. This includes asking for help, accepting wisdom and support from others, and offering your wisdom and support in return. It is acknowledging the fundamental truth of human existence. I need you, and you need me. As a practical example, this might mean talking to friends or family about difficult times instead of isolating yourself and trying to solve everything alone. Or in the workplace, it might mean acknowledging and utilizing colleagues' insights and skills instead of pretending to have all the answers. Third, practicing weakness means developing greater compassion for yourself and others. When we acknowledge our own imperfections and suffering, we often become more open-hearted toward the imperfections and suffering of others. This can lead to a deeper connection to our shared humanity, beyond shame and harsh judgment about failure. Consider the experience of a psychotherapist. She always thought she could help clients with her expertise and wisdom. However, when she had to leave work due to serious health issues, she had to directly face her own vulnerability and limitations. During the recovery process, she discovered that this experience actually transformed her therapeutic approach, making it deeper and more authentic. By experiencing her own pain and limitations, she was able to empathize with clients' pain in a new way, becoming a more effective therapist as a result. Fourth, practicing weakness often means accepting uncertainty and uncontrollability. We cannot fully control or predict the future. We do not have answers to all problems. When we acknowledge this fundamental uncertainty, we can paradoxically discover greater peace and adaptability. Fifth, in the spiritual dimension, practicing weakness may include depending on something beyond one's limitations, a divine being, cosmic order, or simply a community larger than oneself. In many spiritual traditions, acknowledging this dependence is considered a key element of true freedom and peace. In the Christian tradition, this dependence is often expressed in the language of surrender or yielding. Jesus invites in Matthew 11:28-30, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest," and continues, "For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light." Cynics might argue that this approach is simply a way to avoid the difficulties of reality. However, in deep spiritual traditions, this yielding is not an escape from reality, but a way of relating more deeply to reality. It is giving up our illusions of control and becoming open to deeper dimensions of our existence. From a practical perspective, practicing weakness might include concrete steps, such as taking moments each day to acknowledge your limitations and needs, regularly asking others for help and support, cultivating greater compassion for your own and others' imperfections, recognizing the gifts and support you've received through daily gratitude practice, developing greater acceptance of uncertainty and uncontrollability, and 6, cultivating trust and dependence on something greater than yourself. Proverbs 3:5-6 beautifully expresses this attitude. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. These practices are not easy and may become a lifelong journey. But when we embrace the paradox of weakness, we can discover new sources of wisdom, more authentic relationships, and authenticity and peace. Chapter 8: Transformative Strength from Weakness, Synthesis and Vision. As we conclude this audiobook, we want to integrate the various perspectives we've explored and present a more holistic vision of transformative strength from weakness. The paradox of weakness lies at the heart of our human experience. We are finite, vulnerable, and fundamentally interdependent beings. Denying this reality is like fighting against the laws of nature, and it leads us to more suffering, alienation, and ultimately, weakening. However, when we acknowledge and embrace our weakness and vulnerability, something remarkable happens. We experience deeper connection, more authentic relationships, and greater compassion for ourselves and others. We give up the illusion of control and take a more open stance toward the richness and complexity of life. We move beyond relying solely on our own strength and resources, toward collaboration with others, and connection with sources of greater wisdom and power. This is precisely the transformative strength from weakness. It is not fake strength gained by suppressing or denying vulnerability. It is a deeper and more genuine kind of strength, discovered by acknowledging and embracing vulnerability. This transformative strength appears in various forms. First, psychological resilience, the ability to develop greater inner resources and wisdom through hardship and trauma. Second, relational authenticity, the courage to remove masks and relate as one's true self. Third, ethical courage, the moral strength to acknowledge one's limits and errors, and to seek forgiveness and change when necessary. Fourth, creative openness, the ability to tolerate uncertainty and ambiguity, and to be open to new possibilities and perspectives. Fifth, spiritual humility, acknowledging that one doesn't have all the answers and maintaining an open posture toward greater wisdom. Sixth, servant leadership, influence based on empathy and service rather than power and control. Seventh, communal solidarity, the ability to form networks of mutual support and care rather than individual independence. The Bible beautifully captures various aspects of this transformative strength. When the Apostle Paul's prayer about his thorn went unanswered, he records hearing from God. "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." 2 Corinthians 12:9. This suggests that weakness is not simply an obstacle to overcome, but a channel through which a deeper kind of power and grace can flow into our lives. Isaiah 40:29-31 expresses this paradox as follows: "He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint." Of course, it is easy to dismiss all this as merely an idealistic perspective. We still live in a competitive and often ruthless world, and expressions of weakness can often be dangerous. But paradoxically, that very danger proves the true power of this paradox. Uncertainty, vulnerability, and interdependence can be not just uncomfortable realities to be accepted, but gateways to deeper humanity and more meaningful life. Modern poet Leonard Cohen wrote, "There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in." This beautifully captures the paradox of weakness. Our cracks and empty spaces, our wounds and limitations, are openings through which greater light and grace can enter. Psychologist Winnicott said, "There is no such thing as a perfect mother, and if there were, it would be a disaster for the child. A mother's imperfections and failures are essential for the child to develop their independent self. Similarly, our own imperfections and limitations are essential to our humanity and growth." In conclusion, returning to our question, why can humans become stronger when they are weak? Sirenia. It is because our weakness breaks the illusion of self-sufficiency, opening us to deeper truth in relationships. It is because weakness dismantles our illusions of control, opening us to greater wisdom and grace. It is because acknowledging weakness leads us to a more authentic self and a more authentic community. This is precisely what ancient wisdom traditions have long known, and what modern psychology and neuroscience are rediscovering. True strength comes not from denying vulnerability, but from embracing it. Put differently, perhaps the question we should ask is not, how can we become stronger, but how can we become more authentically weak? When we embrace this paradox, we can discover a strength deeper than mere human strength, a more divine strength that flows through us. Proverbs 3:5-6 summarizes this wisdom of weakness. "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight." Conclusion. Through this audiobook, we have explored the deep paradox of human existence, strength from weakness. Through insights from psychology, philosophy, theology, and social science, we have examined various aspects of this paradox. We have discovered that weakness is not a simple deficiency or obstacle to overcome, but can be a gateway to deeper humanity, more authentic relationships, and a more transformative kind of strength. How you apply these insights in your life is up to you. Perhaps it will mean approaching relationships with greater vulnerability and authenticity. Or it might mean acknowledging your limitations and needs more honestly. Or it might mean cultivating greater compassion, not only for yourself, but also for others' weaknesses. In whatever form, when we embrace the paradox of weakness, we experience the truth that the Bible has long testified to. "For when I am weak, then I am strong." 2 Corinthians 12:10. Thank you sincerely for listening to the end. I hope this content brings meaningful insights and changes to your life. If you want more content like this, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Press the subscribe button and set up notifications to be the first to receive news whenever new audiobooks and content are uploaded. Your continued interest and support are a great strength to us. We will meet again in the next audiobook. Thank you.